Later today, President Biden will speak before other nations in the 2023 Democracy Summit in an effort to reinforce global unity in the context of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Now, according to reports, Biden is expected to announce $690 million in funding as part of his administration's Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal. The White House says these funds will go into fighting corruption, buttress freedom of the press, and defend fair elections.
Meanwhile, Biden weighed in on the political chaos that's gripped Israel this week over Prime Minister Netanyahu's effort to reform the country's judiciary. This is what he told reporters yesterday. Let's watch.
Like many strong supporters of Israel, I'm very concerned. And I'm concerned that they get this straight. They cannot continue down this road. And I've sort of made that clear. Hopefully the Prime Minister will act in a way that he's going to try to work out some genuine compromise, but that remains to be seen.
Netanyahu hit back this morning saying he will not succumb to pressure from even the best of friends to pull back the judicial overhaul. This is, to be really clear, Robby, it's not a reform to the judiciary. It is a move that many people are describing as a somewhat authoritarian one to basically take over one of the only independent branches of government that exist in the Israeli system, and one of the only mechanisms politically that have offered any relief for Palestinians who are by law, like shut out from the rights and privileges of the legal system and equal kind of representation under the law to adjudicate their claims. So, you know, this is such a huge overreach that, you know, young people in Israel who are, unlike the United States, disproportionately more conservative and potentially less sympathetic to the plight of Palestinians in the area have come out to the streets and protest. And it's such a aggressive move that even Joe Biden, who counts Israel as one of his closest friends and allies, has been willing to make this statement, which might be mild in the grand scheme of things, but in the context of this geopolitical relationship, it's quite strong.
Look, I am a fan of an independent judiciary. I think maybe more even than you are, actually. And I'm not particularly supportive of Benjamin Netanyahu's administration. However, this looks to me like ultimately this is a plan, right, to subjugate the judiciary to the legislative body. I don't know that that's necessarily anti-democratic. And again, we had a guest on this yesterday, and I guess I wasn't totally persuaded by what he said. I mean, because in the U.S. context, the strident and increasing independence of the Supreme Court is something that a lot of liberals and progressives are very upset about because it overrules a lot of what they're doing in legislative terms, and I don't know, these things seem a little bit in conflict to me. I mean, it happens to be that in the U.S., conservative power is concentrated in the court, in the Supreme Court specifically, and in Israel, I think progressive power is concentrated in the court.
I don't think the court is especially progressive. I just think it's more progressive
enough for your taste.
This isn't about me. I'm just saying it happens to be marginally look, I think the people, my point about describing the politics of the people who are protesting is to say they're not protesting because they are lefties who find, it's more of an indictment of how far right and how out of step with the population Netanyahu is. You can make an argument that the decisions by the Supreme Court, even if I disagree with them, are more or less in line with the decisions of average Americans, that something like abortion has always been in kind of a middle ground with not 60% of support for maintaining the law of what it is, but not overwhelming in the way that some other things are. I should be clear that the decisions out of the Supreme Court that are most impactful and which are undercovered and ignored and which are very much dictated by a conservative majority are these financial decisions that enormously ratchet back kind of economic protections for working class people, but they don't get as much attention as the cultural issues. But putting that to the side, you can make the case that the Supreme Court is much more aligned with what's going on in the United States than what's going on in Israel. And while I have my own feelings about the inadequacies of the Supreme Court, overwhelming majorities of Americans feel like it offers a counterbalance and that we have these three parts of government that are supposed to balance each other out. The point that our guest made yesterday was that Israel doesn't even have structurally the same tension between a House, a Senate, and the executive the way that we do. And so absent the court, it really is much more of an executive fiat situation. And given how conservative Netanyahu is, even compared to the other conservatives in Israel, that is why even a conservative, youthful population is choosing to come out and protest this particular power grab.
And I'm no fan of him, but he was the, elected. He's the choice of the elective body. The body is elected. They choose him to be the leader, and he's seeking more control over. Again, I'm not particularly invested in this. It just seems like if in the U.S. if there was these are usually progressive plans, or plans coming from Democrats and liberals and progressives to have a retirement age for the Supreme Court, or have more justice, some fair way of picking the justices, so that the sitting president, often a Democrat for the last 20 years, would have a better ability to pick his justices, and not right now you basically have a president and Senate of the a 60 Senate majority and the president to do it. Actually 51 majority, but like a proposal to give the president more power, or the party that's ruling more power over the Supreme Court, I don't think would be considered anti-democratic in the U.S. context. So it's odd to me to be. Again, I'm not very invested in this question. As I said, I don't really care, but the outrage seems partisan to me. It's just, there's more power for Netanyahu, which people don't like.
I just don't understand how it can be partisan if people who are political conservatives, to your point, people who may have even voted for and supported Netanyahu, are objecting to this move. I mean, it's like you're describing a world in which just because someone voted for Trump, they can't have displeasure with something that he does in office. Millions of people voted for Biden and are deeply frustrated with the fact that he's opened up drilling in the Arctic. People vote for folks because they prefer them to the alternative, or maybe even substantively like them, and then find themselves disappointed by things that they do in office.
Well, then I guess the Netanyahu coalition will face some major blowback in the next Israeli elections, and maybe that, he lost once before, right? And then he faced corruption charges and all that kind of stuff.
A little premature. What we're talking about now is whether or not there is going to be international pressure because of the standing that Israel has claimed for itself and that America has put on it in the international sphere as a protector of the rule-based order, as one of the only democracies in the region, et cetera, whether it can stand on 2 feet and continue to make those kinds of claims when, on top of the abominable way that they've treated Palestinians, they are now also in the middle of what in any other country would be described as a kind of despotic power grab of an executive. And that is why I think you're getting Biden pushing back, even mildly as it is, in a way that is like relatively unprecedented, and why you're getting this really harsh series of tweets from Netanyahu, again, contextualized within their relationship, which is gratuitously friendly. Netanyahu saying, I have known President Biden for over 40 years and I appreciate his longstanding commitment to Israel. However, he's not going to, what does he say? Israel is a sovereign country which makes its decision by the will of its people and not based on pressures from abroad, including from the best of friends. I mean, that's a very
That's
clear...
all well and good. I would turn off the aid to them anyway. We don't need to be sending the military. I would do that along with several actual leading Republicans, including Rand Paul. So I would do you one better than old Joe, who's making this milk with toast. That's so interesting.
Statement. I don't think it will come to that, but the fact that is even, Biden's willingness to articulate displeasure up until this point, we live in a political environment where being critical of Israel's behavior at all is often characterized as anti-Semitic. Any thought of withdrawing any aid in any way, shape, or form is characterized as anti-Semitic, or not wanting Israel to exist, or these kinds of statements. And that is, I think, why it is so interesting and notable that Joe Biden is willing to weigh in at this point. And I don't know exactly what is provoking it, because certainly there's any number of reasons that Biden could have criticized Netanyahu up until this point. The fact of the reason so many progressives are concerned about this judiciary overhaul is because of the way the judiciary has been the last bulwark against incursions on Palestinian rights. But certainly the U.S. has turned a blind eye to that sort of thing for a really long time. So the fact that this now is what's causing Biden to speak out is interesting, and it suggests to me that there is an authoritarian push by Netanyahu in the country that is getting even too intense for America to ignore.
We skipped over the first part of the story, the $690 million for this Renew Democracy initiative, which I'm looking up at the White House website. Part of this is supporting free and independent media to help mitigate the existential threat to the survival of independent media, this is a partnership with Microsoft to create a new web-based data platform that will enable media outlets to better understand their markets, audiences, and strategies. $16 million for the promotion of information integrity and resilience. The fighting corruption part is not very specified to me. This doesn't seem like the greatest use of tax dollars.
In the grand scheme of things, it's not that much money. But, you know, I do think these stories, I mean, these stories are related insofar as America goes around saying things like it wants to do democracy summits and have this kind of global standing and authority around the world at the same time that it is refusing to allow a UN investigation into who actually bombed the Nord Stream pipeline and tacitly endorsing and funding what is quickly becoming a rather authoritarian regime in one of our closest allies in the Middle East. And so at some point, the ship has to be righted if America wants to have the authority to take on the conflicts that I think are more useful to it in the geopolitical context, like the war, the proxy war against Russia.
Yeah, this is, I can't think of worse ways to spend American tax dollars, actually, but, well, I can think of some worse ways, but this is not this isn't on the good list either. We'll have more Rising right after this.